Hello guys, welcome to this tutorial. In this video I'm going to show you how to add a multi-step form in your EditorX website. I previously made a video where you have an advanced form in Wix and we use multi-state elements to show different states or different pages of a form in a single Wix static page. So in this tutorial I want to show you how to do the same thing in EditorX, but in this case we're not going to be making use of the multi-state box because EditorX has no multi-state box. So what we're going to do first of all is to start setting out the pages for our multi-step form. Alright, so the first thing that I want to do is to drag and drop a box into the website. I'm going to be using box to separate the different states or pages for the multi-step form. So I'm going to head over to the add elements and I'm going to go to layout tools. So right here in the layout tools, I'm going to drag any of these boxes into my page. I'm going to choose this white one. And then I'm going to make sure that this is actually aligned to the center of my page. And I can go ahead to drag that down a little bit. Alright, so this seems like what I want to achieve. And what I want to do next is to customize this a little bit. So I'm going to go over here at the inspector. And over here at the design, I'm going to click on that. So I'm going to increase the corner radius and I'm going to type in 5. I'm going to use 5 and let's see how that turns out. So you can see that nice shape there at the corner edges. So next thing we want to do is to make sure that we have text and input elements on here. Okay, so to add a text, head back into the plus over there and then over here text, you can see we have a text menu. So we can go ahead to drag and drop any of these text elements. I'm going to go ahead to drag in a heading 5 and I'm just going to place it right at the top. We can see that the color is a little bit white, so I'm going to double click on that, or you can click on edit. So click on that or click on edit, and over here you can edit the font style, the color, and every other thing that we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead to edit mine. Alright, so mine is already all set, and what I want to do next is to name this file, is to name this page. So I'm going to call this the personal details. So this is the state or the page where I'm going to be placing the customer personal detail forms. Okay, so the next thing to add is to add the input element to collect the personal details such as the first name, last name, and email. So I'm going to head over to the add element section again, and you can see from here I do not see the inputs menu because our dev mode is turned off. So I'm going to go ahead to turn on my dev mode. Now my dev mode is all turned on, and what I'm going to do is to head back to the add element section again, and here we can see the input section. Alright, so from here we can see we have the text input. So I'm going to be making use of the text input elements. I'm going to drag that into my website and I'm going to stretch that across. Now that is about the size that I want it to be. I'm just going to enlarge that a little bit, and I'm going to customize this to the way I want all the forms on the website to look like. Alright, so I'm done with all the design for my inputs element, and this is the design I'm going to make use of across my entire form. Okay, so over here you see I've designed the regular view, the hover view, the focus view, and the arrow view. Okay, these are the views that I'm going to be making use of, and the next thing I want to do is to customize what is written in there, which is a placeholder text. First of all, I want to add a title to this. I'm going to call this first name. Okay, so the user knows that this is going to be the first name field, and they will actually add your first name. So here I'm going to leave this as add your name, and this should be checked on default, and you can see the asterisk over there. That means that this is a required field. But first of all, I actually don't like the color and feel of the title field, so I'm going to go back into the design tool and I'm going to go ahead to change the font style and the color of my field. Okay, so this seems a little bit better than it was before, and this is the kind of design that I want to use. You can go ahead to customize your form according to the template or the theme of your website, and that is actually very fine. Okay, so now we know what this field is all about, and most importantly, this type of field is a text field, and there are a bunch of others that we can make use of in the form. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to right click on this, and I'm also going to go ahead to duplicate. Now once we duplicate, I'm going to also use this field for another field, which is the first name. So I'm going to go ahead to edit this last first section and call that the first name. I'm going to hit enter, and then next I'm also going to duplicate these again, and I'm going to call this one the email. So over here I'm going to call this the email, and I'm going to say enter your email. Okay, so that seems about right. And the final thing to do here is to change the type of field. This is an email field, and this is going to help us to validate the form when the user is trying to submit their form. All right, so this is about all the fields that I want to add for the first page, which is the personal detail page. The next thing to add is the button to go to the next page when we are trying to navigate to maybe the address page, which is actually the next one. So what to add here is button element to say next. So I'm going to go over to the button section, and I'm going to drag and drop this button onto this page. And what I'm going to do next is to make sure that this button actually says next or continue. Either one of them is actually great. So I'm going to use continue. I think that sounds more appealing. So I'm going to use continue, and I'm going to go ahead to edit this button right over here at the design section. Okay, so this seems about right, the kind of design that I want to have for the first page. And what I'm going to do here is to change the ID of this box element. So this is the personal detail page. So I'm going to click on my on the code panel section. I'm going to expand that, and over here is the properties panel, which is the code information for the element being selected. So again, click on the box element, and then you can open up your code panel, and here over the properties panel, I'm going to change the ID to personal let me just reduce that to per box. Okay, so that works perfectly. And the next thing to do is also to change the IDs of these elements. We're going to be making use of these elements later to validate the forms. So I'm going to go ahead to change this ID to first name, and I'm going to change this to last name, and finally I'm going to change this to email. Now this button element is going to be disabled on load, and the reason is because when the user is trying to fill this form, we want to make sure that the user actually fills out every single box before moving to the next step. So that is actually the interactivity I want to introduce. So we want to disable this button to make sure that the user actually fills out these forms, and then they can continue to the next form or the next page. Okay, so you need to disable that on load, and I have done that over here. So just click on check that to disable. We can change this one to next one. Okay, so this is going to be the first button that goes to the next page. All right, so once we're done with this page, I'm going to create another address detail box. So what I'm going to do is just to duplicate this, and this is going to reduce the stress a huge lot of time for me. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is to change the text, or what the text says. I'm going to change this to address details. All right, and the next thing I'm going to do here is to add the address input element. So this is going to stand as the address, so the user is going to add the address over here, and I'm going to change the placeholder text to say add address. Okay, let's change that to add address. Okay, and the next one is going to stand for, let's say the city, or let's say the city, and then we're going to say add your city. So all right, and finally I'm going to use this field as zip. So I'm going to change this so it's zip. I'm going to say add or enter your, let's just use add your zip code. All right, so now we are almost done with the second page, which is the address page, and we have again the continue button, and this button, we're going to call this button next to. That's going to be the ID. But before we do that, I'm just going to duplicate this button again, and I'm going to make it bring it over here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to make sure that the user can also go back to the previous state or the previous step in order to change the details. So this is going to go to previous. We're going to change this to previous, or let's just call that back. And what I'm going to do is to redesign this, and this is not disabled on load, so I'm going to enable that back, and you can see the color is green. but I'm going to change the color a little bit because I want it to stand out from the continue button. So that's just about that with this page. As you can see, we are almost done. The next step is to add the IDs, to change the IDs to what we can use later in our code. So this field is going to be called the address, and then the city is also going to be called city. And finally, we have our input, which is the zip code field, is going to be called zip. And then we're also going to name our buttons because we're going to make use of our buttons a lot in the code. So this is going to be next to. The first one in the first page is called next one, so the second one is going to be next to, and then the back is going to be called back one. All right, so you're going to see why I use these IDs later in our code. It's going to be much easier for us to deal with. And then what we're going to do for this field is, since our personal detail field is going to be the first one that the user sees, we're going to leave it shown. But for the other fields, we're going to hide them on load. So what I'm going to do is to click on this box, and we're also going to change the ID of the box to the address box. And then we're going to click on this hidden on load. So that means that when the page loads, this box is going to be hidden. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead to duplicate the address field, and we're going to go to the final field, box field, that we're going to be using for the input element. So we're going to go over here, the duplicate, and then we're going to click on the duplicate, and then we can just move that a little bit over there. Okay, so having a little bit of conflict with the design, I'm going to push this one right over here, and then I'm going to drag this out from here. Okay, let's drag that out. Okay, so now we have this, but first of all, I'm going to unhide this for a while so that you can see what I'm trying to do here. So this is the final field, and we're going to call this field the job details. Okay, so this is going to act as a job application form. So what I'm going to do is to choose what form that the user is trying to do. And here I am going to introduce another field, which is going to be a drop down field. Okay, we'll be making use of the input element. So I'm going to go ahead to delete this address field over here. I'm going to go back to the add element, and then I'm going to head down to the input, and I'm going to look for the drop down right over here. So I'm going to drag this drop down into my box element, and then I'm going to stretch that out a little bit. All right, so right over here you can see that I have these elements, and I'm going to drag it out. Okay, I think that the height is on auto, so I'm going to remove that and place that on percentage. So I'm going to drag it to the same height as this, and this height, I'm not sure what that height is, but I'm going to leave it this way for now and head over to the design. I'm going to design this field to match my other fields. Okay, so we have our drop down element designed closely like the other ones, but it's actually missing something, which is the title. So I'm going to go over to the settings, and I'm going to change the title to job status. So I'm going to call this job status, and the reason is because I want them to show if they actually have if they're employed or not employed. Okay, so I'm going to go again to click on this drop down. I'm going to click on the inspector. I'm going to drag my page right there, and then I'm going to choose to change the font style of my page title. Okay, so now I'm done with the design of my drop down element, and I have chosen to change it to the job status, and as you can see, it matches the other fields just a little bit. So you can go ahead to implement your design to change the look and everything else according to how you want it. The next thing here is to change or manage the choices. Okay, the choices are also the options that the user will choose. So I'm going to go ahead to delete 2 of these, and I'm going to edit the other 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question right here over at the placeholder. So click on the settings, and the placeholder text should be, are you employed? All right, so that is going to be the question that's going to be asked, and then our options are just 2 options, and we're going to type in employed. So you're just going to place or copy this label into your value section. So what you're going to be working with in the code is the value. So that is the most important part of these options. All right, so the next one, we're going to say not employed. So again, you're going to highlight that, and then you're going to copy that into your values field. Okay, and then you're all done with this field. We're all done with the drop down or the job status field. Okay, next thing, again, I want to change this asterisk to red because the other ones are red. So I'm going to head back into the inspector, and under the design, I think that's in the text. So here at the required opacity, I'm going to change that to red. Okay, now it matches the other fields, and then we're also good to go. Okay, so right over here, if the user says that they are employed, we want to collect their employer's name. Okay, so I'm going to go over here and type in employer's name. And what I'm going to do over here is a conditional field that will only appear when the user actually is employed, or when they choose they are not employed, is going to be hidden. All right, so I'm going to say add your employer's name. Okay, so that is going to be a conditional field, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this field, and I'm going to head back into the properties panel, and I'm going to collapse this field on load. So this field is going to be collapsed on load, which means when we view it, it's not going to be shown. And finally, we have a field over here which we are going to be calling the driver's license. So it can be anything. Okay, so we're going to call this driver's license, and I'm going to say add your driver's license. Okay, so this field is not going to be enabled or going to be required. Okay, so the user can choose to not fill up this form or this field if they choose that. Okay, so finally we are done with adding all the fields that we need, and next we're going to add or do something for this form, this box. We're going to change the ID to job box. Okay, and then we're going to change this to job status. We're going to change this other one to employer. So I'm just going to name that employer so that the ID isn't too long. And then finally we have the driver's license. I'm just going to call that license. Okay, so that is just all I'm going to name those. And finally, this one over here is the submit button. So this is going to be called the submit button. So when the user has gotten to this stage, we want them to submit their form. All right, so this one over here is going to be called back 2. All right, so we already have back 1, so I'm going to call this back 2. All right, so this is going to bring us back to the previous state that we were on, and this right over here is going to be called the submit button. So I'm going to call that submit button. Okay, so that is all set. All right, so we're done with all the IDs for our forms, for the boxes, for every other thing that we need. And finally, we want to make sure that this also is hidden on load. So I'm going to go ahead to check that box which said hidden. All right, so as you can see, it is also hidden on load. What we need to do next is to arrange it the same height or the same way as we have our personal box, and then or maybe what we're going to do is to drag this a little bit downwards. We're going to add another field on top, so I'm going to drag that a little bit downward. All right, so our elements are all set. I'm going to click on these elements first of all. I'm going to click on inspector, and over here at the layout, I'm going to click on this icon over here to align to horizontal center. So I'm going to click that, and that aligns it to the horizontal center. I'm also going to click on the second one to align it to the horizontal center. So as you can see, all our elements are aligned, and that is exactly what we want to do. So what we want to do is to make them show when we click on a button or hide when we click on the other buttons. The last design process we're going to engage is to add a progress bar to the top of our form. This will allow the user to know where they are on the form submission. Okay, so next, actually not the last, we have one more box to add, but that is going to be an easy one. So I'm going to click on the input, and over here I'm going to click on the progress bar. So I'm going to look for the best progress bar that I like. I think I like the first one, so I'm going to drag that into the page. I'm going to stretch that out. Okay, so I'm also going to align this to the center. I'm not sure what the width of this is, but I'm going to copy the width, and I'm also going to place make the progress bar the same width as the forms. All right, so again I'm going to align that. Okay, so now we have all our forms and everything all set out. I'm going to add a button element so that it looks the same way as the one I did in Wix. So the form that I made in Wix looks something like this, and I'm going to make it to be almost the same design or almost the same features that this one has. Alright, so the next thing is to add these buttons. As you can see, these are button elements. I'm going to add buttons to overlay the progress bar. So I'm going to head over to the buttons, and I'm going to do that quite quickly to make sure we don't spend so much time on this. Alright, so I've added my first button, and the ID is called button 1. Okay, I'm going to add 3 more buttons. So I'm going to duplicate these by clicking Ctrl D, and I can duplicate these to be another button. Okay, so next I'm going to change the text to say 2, and I'm going to do the same one for the other 2 more buttons. Alright, so you can see that we are almost done with this section. I'm going to align these buttons to make sure that they are actually in the same progress as we have over here. So as you can see, when I just type in random words and I just move to the next step, you can see that moves to the next level. So I'm going to do the same thing for these buttons, but first of all, I'm going to change their IDs. The ID for this is button 1, so I'm going to make this one called button 2, and the other one is going to be called button 3. Yours might have a different ID. As you can see, this one we already have a button called button 3, so we can't make use of that. I think this is called button 3, so I'm going to change this one to something else because I want my buttons to actually align. So I'm going to go over here and change this to button 3, and finally this is going to be called button 4. Alright, so all our buttons are all set. I'm going to also go ahead to disable the 3 buttons over here, and the reason is because I want the users to go to the next step or be able to click on the buttons when they have arrived at a specific button location. Okay, so now we are all set with the design, and finally I'm going to add a box that is going to be called a success box. So when the user has submitted their item, I want them to be shown or moved to a new box, which is going to be called a success box. So right here I'm going to add a little bit of design to it. Alright, so I quickly created a box element for our success submission. So what we're going to do here is, as you can see, I have a button that says submit again. So what this button does is it's going to bring us back to this first page, and also it's going to disable the rest of the buttons. That's all it does. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to align this to the center. I'm going to align all my elements to the center, and then we're going to jump into the code section. Okay, I'm going to call this the ID of these button element as submit again button. Alright, so that's going to be the ID, and it's also going to be called, the box itself is going to be called submit success box. Alright, and it's also hidden on load, and we are also going to align this button to the center of our page. And before we go further, I'm going to create a database collection where the content will be saved. So I haven't created one yet, and I'm going to create one from scratch, and it's called create new collection. And I'm going to be creating the fields that I have on my forms. So I'm going to go to create new collection. I'm going to click on get started. I'm going to call this job application, and over here at the advanced, I'm going to click on the choose the custom use, because this is going to be a custom use. So this means that who can read, anyone can read, who can create. I'm going to change the permission to basically everyone, but this doesn't mean that they can actually delete, because we're not going to give them the option to do so. We are only creating the content so that users anywhere, if you're logged in or not logged in, you can submit the form. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead here to create my first field, which is called the first name, and it's a text element. So I'm going to click on save. I'm going to also create another one which is called the last name, and click on save. I'm also going to create something called a full name, although we do not have the full name, but I'm going to show you how to make this to combine the values from these two together using data hooks. So I'm going to make this one the primary field, and then get rid of this title field. I don't need that, and I'm going to drag this to the first place. So I'm going to create the other fields that I have. Okay, so we're all done with the fields. I think I remembered all the fields that I had, but I'm going to go back to connect my fields to my database. So click on the add elements, and then you're going to look for the content manager, which is over here. And here we have our data set. So click on add a data set to your page. I'm going to go ahead to configure these data sets. I'm going to click on settings, and I'm going to choose the collection I had just created, which is called the job application, and it's going to be a write only form. Okay, so we're done configuring our data set. All right, so next I'm going to go ahead to publish my site in order to make sure that the field is live. So I'm going to call the URL job application, save and continue. All right, so we can visit the site to see what we've done so far. And here I'm going to see the pages that I have. This is a template in case you're looking for this template. I think I do not have the link over here. So what I'm going to do is to click on this, head over to the SEO basics, and here I think the SEO hasn't changed yet. I'm going to go to blank, and as you can see, we have our form looking nice, and we're about to add the code. Okay, so now we're set out to start writing the code for this section, and I have the code right here. The link is in the description. You can have access to this code. So I'm just going to copy everything from this page. I'm going to click on Ctrl A and Ctrl C, or just simply copy. All right, so I'm going to bring this into my code panel. I'm going to highlight everything and delete, and then paste my code. So as you can see, we have a bunch of errors, but don't worry, this is going to be as easy as possible. I'm going to show you how to change all your IDs so quickly and so efficiently. All right, so the first thing we have is the ID of our data set. So our data set is right over here, and as you can see, when we click on that and then we open this up, you can see that the ID is called dataset1. All right, so what I'm going to do is to click on my editor, my code panel, and then I'm going to click on Ctrl F, or you can just right click and then you click on find. All right, so what we're going to find over here is the wrong data set, but then this data set isn't wrong. We're going to place it over there, and now you can see how many times that we've used this ID. So we've used this 3 times, and you can go to any of them. But if your ID is different, you're going to look for the data set 1, and then you're going to click on your own data set. So first of all, you need to click on the element and then open that up. Click on the element and copy your ID. I just did, and I'm just going to Ctrl V over there. And you're going to click on this little icon which says replace all, and once you do that, all your IDs are replaced. So we're going to do that with one of the wrong IDs, and the IDs over here is called employee box. Okay, so there is no ID called employee box. I'm going to go ahead first of all to separate these items, because there are a lot of these items everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead to separate the items that I have, and as you can see, we have the employment ID, and I think it's called a job box, which is over here. So click on that box. You can see the ID is called job box from what we named it. So again, click on Ctrl F, and over here at the employee box, I'm going to copy that into the find, and as you can see, it highlights everywhere it was found. And finally, I'm going to also copy the ID of the correct box. I'm going to remove these and then place that over there. Then click on this icon to replace all. Now you can see that it's been replaced everywhere it was used in the code. Okay, this is exactly what I'm trying to achieve, and as you can see, it is really doing the magic. Okay, and then what you want to do next, as you can see, we have other buttons that are wrong. This is button N2. So if you see button N or button 2 or whatever, those are the buttons right over here at the top. This is button 1, this is button 2, button 3, and button 4. Okay, so I'm going to change the ID of button 1. I'm going to look for button 1 first of all, because I don't think I have button 1. Okay, I do have button 1 and it is correct, so I don't need to change that. Let's look for button 2. Button 2 is also correct, so I'm going to check to make sure that everywhere button 2 was found, it's been correct. And yes, everywhere it was found, it's correct. Okay, so button 3 is also correct, and button 4 is also correct. Okay, but what we're going to look for is the ones with the button N1. For example, there is none. Button N2, we have them. It shouldn't be button N, it should be button 2. So I'm going to go ahead to remove the N from all of that. I'm going to go ahead to, because those are the wrong IDs. This is button 4. So let's look for all button N2. I think we have one. So I'm going to remove the N, simply remove the N from there. And we also have the button N3. Let's remove the button N. As you can see, once I change that, it fixes the problem right away. And we have no buttons with N in them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead to click out these, remove all these from here. We still have some errors, and this is previous button 2. And what we're going to do over here is to this is a little bit messy, but don't worry about that. I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. All right, so I've cleaned this up a little bit by separating the boxes how they should be first of all. So as you can see, we have our personal detail box, we have the address, and then we have the job, and also we have the submit success box. Okay, so this is going to be much easier for us to work with. We have the previous button 2. And what the previous button 2 is the second button that goes back. Okay, so we only have 2 buttons that says back, and this is the first one, and it's called back 1. So this button brings us back to this first page, and this button here brings us back to this page. And I named the ID as back 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my code editor, and I'm going to copy this ID, which is the wrong ID, and click on Control Find, and that will automatically auto populate it on the find. So it's only found in one location, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to copy my correct ID, and I'm going to place it onto the place, and then do that, and you can see that fixes the problem. So we still have a bunch of errors, and the other error says employment status. So this employment status is the drop down for the job detail page, which is right over here. All right, and it's called the ID. Actually, I named the ID as job status. So again, I'm going to close this down. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then Control Find. That auto populates. I'm going to Control C this, and then I'm going to Control A and remove, and Control V, and I'm just going to replace everywhere that was found, and that fixes the problem. And over here we have the current employer. Again, this is from the job details form, and I named that the employer. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead to also close down the Control Find. I'm going to copy this, Control C, Control F, and that copies that automatically. And I'm just going to do that, replace it with the correct ID. As you can see, we are almost done, and we are moving very fast. And we can see we have a few errors here, and over here this error is from the next button 1. And I think that is going to be this next one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to do this for all the other IDs. Okay, so we have done that for all the next and previous buttons, I guess. And we have one error here, which is state. This is actually a validation code for the fields for the address and the state. But I think we're actually missing something, because we have address, we have city, and we have zip. So I'm going to change this one to city. So it is not called state. I'm going to look for states, and as you can see, we have state over here. I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to do this for the wrong sections. All right, and finally the last error we have is for the submit success box. Okay, so this box only shows after we submit the form, and over here I named that submit success. So I'm going to go ahead to copy that and simply replace it over here. And as you can see, we have no more red codes here. We only have these semantic error, which is fine because it's not affecting the code in any way possible. All right, so we're done with the most parts of the code, but what I forgot to do was to connect these items to data. So I'm going to do that right away. So click on these connect over here and connect your fields as you have. All right, so I've connected all the other fields to data, and the last part of this one is to connect the submit button. So I'm going to click on the connect. I'm going to click on the submit. Okay, and that is all we're going to do. I'm not sure why my elements don't close. Might be a bug, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Okay, so I'm going to explain. Now we're done with basically almost everything. I'm going to explain the code to you and how the code actually works. So I'm going to first of all refresh this page. Basically, I guess most of our items are going to be working in a while, so I'm going to show you how that works later on. But first of all, I'm going to explain the code to you and what they do. The first part here is the next button 1, and the next button 1 is this button over here, which is in the front page. So when you click on this, it's going to bring you straight to the address details. Okay, and what we're going to do is to make sure that even these icons can do the same things. So that means when we click on this, it brings us to the first page. When we click on this, it also brings us to the maybe address. And when we click on this, it brings us to the job details. And here is the final detail for the submit button. Okay, so the two buttons that brings us back to the address, or brings us to the address state or box, are the next button 1 and button 2. That means that this button brings us to this address, and also the 2, when we click on this button, should bring us to the address field. Okay, so that is what all the code here does, and what it's saying is that we hide the personal box, we also hide the job box, and then we show the address box. So we're going to show the address box and hide the other 2 boxes we have, and then we're also going to increase our progress bar, and also going to scroll to the top to make sure that we have this nice animation that happens whenever we click on that. Okay, so it brings the form into our view, and that is really amazing. But then when we click on button 1 or button 2, we want to make sure that we enable the button 2. So I'm going to test that right away. I'm going to put in my name and my details. So you can see that once I have all my details entered, it really works fine. And we click on continue. The button 2 is activated, and you can see the progress bar just went forward. When we click on 1, it brings us back to the first page. When we click on 2, it brings us to the address field. All right, so we have also the next 2. We have the button 3. So this is going to bring us to the job or this state. It's going to bring us to the job status page. Okay, so this button and this button should bring us to the address state, or this state right over here. And it's basically going to hide every other box we have, but it's only going to show the job box state. Okay, and then the progress bar is also going to increase. We are also going to enable the button. As you can see, it's disabled, but it's only going to be enabled when we click on this button. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do also is to scroll to the top. I want to have that scroll to top effect. As you can see, brings in the box into your view and makes it really comfortable to use. And here is the place where we have the previous buttons. So the previous buttons are the back buttons over here. And I think the reason why it wasn't working is because we have over here the previous button. This should be called back 1. So I'm going to go ahead to publish the site, and then we're going to test that out. All right, so this should be able to work now. I'm just going to refresh the page again, and I'm going to fill out these forms. Once I click on continue, this box is hidden and our address box is shown. When I click on back, it's going to bring us back to the first state, and you can see that the progress bar is very efficient, and you can see that it works as well. Okay, so that is the same thing I'm going to do for the other pages, and we have the back 1 and button 1 doing the same thing. We have the back 2. The back 2 is also going to bring us back to the address field. And what other button brings us back to the address field than the button 2 itself, which we have already declared right over here at the first section. Okay, so you can see over here that we have the first name, last name, and email ID of the first box. I'm going to refresh this for context. We have 3 boxes here. We have the first name, last name, and the email. And what we want to do is when the user is beginning to type in their details, we want to check to make sure that the validations are met. And the most important part of this part is the email validation. Okay, we want to make sure that whatever value the user places in, for example, I place in this value and I begin to type in just a random text, you see we have an error. And this is because this is an email field, so it can only detect an email. But once I begin to type in my email, and once it detects that it's an email, the button is enabled. But once it detects it's not an email, the button is disabled. Okay, so only then can you be able to move forward to the next step. And that is what this regular expression over here does. Okay, so just change your IDs over here. And also we want to make sure that not just the validation of the ID of the email, but also the text have values. So if you remove the value for your last name or any other one, it's also going to be disabled. Okay, so that is what this validation does. So it's a conditional statement. If all the values have values greater than 0 and the email validation is also valid, then we want to enable the button, else we want it to be disabled. And the same goes for our address, zip, and city sections. And the reason why we're also doing this is to make sure that the values or the input elements actually have values in them. So let's go to the next one, which is called the address. I'm just going to put in a random number over here. This doesn't really matter. So as you can see, once all of them have values, the button will be enabled. But once I delete that, you can see that the button is disabled. So that is the value or the validation code for the address field. And also we have the most important part of this code, which is actually the validation for our job details. So let's assume over here that the user is employed. We're going to find this field. But when the user says he's not employed, you can see that the field is hidden. Okay, so I'm not sure why it doesn't collapse properly, but that is what it's supposed to do. So what happens is when you choose employed, this field becomes a required field. But once it's become not employed, it becomes a non-required field. And what I want to do is, since this field is not a required field as well, that means that this button can be submitted. Okay, if you're not employed, you may not submit. But once you are employed, the button is disabled because there is a required field. So you need to add your required field value before the button is actually enabled. Okay, so that is all with the validation. And finally, I'm going to show you this section as well, which is the data set on after save function. So when your submission has been saved successfully, we want to hide all the buttons except all the boxes except one box, which is the submit success box. I'm going to show you that in a while. We're going to test this from the beginning to the end, but I'm just going to show you a few things about what this box code actually does. So this is the code for the error section. Okay, and then finally we have submit again function. So what this function does is it hides all the boxes except one box, and the box is going to show is the personal detail box. So I forgot to add another box to be hidden, which is the submit success box. So I'm going to change that right away. Submit success. Nope. Yep, that is it. So all the boxes will be hidden except for the personal detail box. Okay, so before we test this fully, I'm going to add a code into, I'm going to create a data hook for my database. So I'm going to go over here at the content manager, or I'm going to click on the site structure. I actually prefer the site structure. Click on the databases, and then over here you're going to click on the 3 dots, and you're going to click on add or remove hooks. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to choose the first option, which is before or insert. So before our item is saved, we want to perform an operation. So over here, let's hide this for now. I'm going to click on this option, which is the data.js. This is the hook that we just created. And what I want to do is to actually save the name, the first name and the second name in the same field. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to write a simple code. I'm going to create a variable that holds the first name of the user. And I'm going to say that the item that I want to get is the field key first name. Okay, so let's head back into our database for a while. So I'm going to show you the field key that I'm actually referring to. Okay, so right here we have the last name. I think this should come first, so let's bring this over here. We have the last name, and then we have the first name, and then the last name. Okay, I'm gonna click on the properties, and over here you can see we have the field key. So you can copy this field key to your data hook, and also this one, the last name, to your data hook. Okay, just to make sure that we are correct, we are also going to remember this field key, which is called full name. Okay, and then we're going to go back into our code. We're going to expand our data hook section. So we got the first field key, which is this is correct, first name. We're also going to do the same thing for the last name, item.last name. And then we are also going to do something else. We're going to declare another variable, which is going to be called let the full name, and I'm going to use template literal to actually join them together as a string. Okay, so I'm going to do this. The first one is going to be the first name, and then I'm going to have a little bit of space over there, and I'm going to have the last name. Okay, so we can add more strings in here. For example, we can just say right over here in the front, we can just say the full name is. So when this is saved, it's going to save as full name is, the actual user first name, and the actual last name. Okay, so the last step here is to actually put in this value into our database field full name. Okay, so I'm first of all going to remember, I'm going to get that ID, which is called the full name, and I'm also going to assign it to the string that we just created, which is called full name. Okay, and then I'm going to say return item. Okay, so hopefully this works, and this is all we need to do to make sure that we've combined our values for the first and the last name. So you can do this for other sections. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead to join my boxes. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead to join my boxes and make them aligned in the same horizontal levels. So I'm going to go ahead to open up the inspector and then align that horizontally to the center. I'm also going to do the same thing for the address box. I'm going to bring that up and then align to the horizontal. The same thing for the success box, and I'm going to publish my code. Okay, so we are almost we are done with that, and we have actually published our code. I'm going to refresh this section, and as you can see, we have a nice looking form in our editor X, and it is ready to be tested. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to fill up the form. So I'm going to go ahead to type in my email over here. And as you can see, that has been validated. I can move forward. I can type in any address or anything here. I can go ahead to write anything I want over here. That doesn't matter. I think there was an error. So this seems to have an error, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. So this field over here is an email field, which is wrong. This should be a text field. Okay, so that should be a text field, and that was the issue that we have. So I'm going to go ahead to refresh that again. So this is the process of making sure that everything works, and you might experience these issues. So I'm showing you the walkthrough on how to avoid the issues. All right, so we have employed. I'm going to add my name over there, and that should be good to go. So submit success, and that is submitted successfully. If we go back to those stages, we can see that again, most of the items were not submitted. We have to publish the site again. All right, so I have connected my items and we're ready to test again, and I'm going to go ahead to autofill like we did in the previous sections. I'm going to autofill these forms, and I'm going to say not employed, and I'm going to click on submit. Okay, so let's head into our database to see if these items were actually submitted. All right, so you can see from the first one that the items were submitted, and although some fields were not submitted, but that is okay because the issue could have been that they were not connected properly. But when you do yours, make sure to connect them properly. And most importantly is the data hook that I created. As you can see, we have the full name is the first name and the combination of the first name and the last name. these were the other attempts that I made that were unsuccessful. So that is how you create a multi-step form in EditorX. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you did enjoy. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel and also give this video a thumbs up. This is your learning hub, and you can always come here to learn more about Wix and EditorX. So thank you very much, and see you in the next tutorial.